Today we are with Dr. Yann, and we're going to be talking about your most recent publication titled Genome-wide Association Study of Liking for Several Types of Physical Activity in the UK Biobank and 2 replication cohorts. So I usually like to start these type of interviews, maybe gathering some background on how did this particular study came about.
Yeah, well, a lot of it revolves around the opportunity that was given to us by the UK Biobank, this large prospective study of 500,000 adults from the UK, and where all of these people are have answered surveys, have been genotyped for millions of markers, and are being followed over time. And specifically, that gave us the opportunity to do a genetic, or it's called the Genome-wide Association Study of self-reported physical activity. For example, how many days per week do you do vigorous exercise, and how long do you do it for, if you do it? Not only self-reported physical activity, but also physical activity as measured by a Fitbit type of device that about 100,000 of the UK Biobank participants wore on their wrist for 1 week. So that was back in 2018. We published a paper on that, identifying specific genetic markers that were associated with how physically active someone is. And then we had the opportunity, thanks to another survey that was about food preferences, for example, or food liking. For example, do you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you like mushrooms? Or there's 150 different foods, but within there was also some questions about physical activity. Do you like working up a sweat? Do you like going to the gym? Do you like exercising with others or alone? And then also, do you like bicycling? And that gave us an opportunity to kind of dig more into the genetics of physical activity behavior. And so that's what this paper is about, is kind of learning more about the various avenues that lead some people to engage in physical activity more than others. And genetics is just part of the story. And even within genetics, there's many genetic avenues. There's the genetic avenue of maybe you have good cardiorespiratory fitness, so you can exercise for a long time, or you have almost like this addiction to the feeling you get from physical activity, or the opposite. You have a kind of almost a disgust reaction to engaging in physical activity. It doesn't make you feel good. So there's all kinds of ways in which all sorts of avenues that lead people to be more physically active than others.
Yeah. And so one thing that really resonated with me, I guess, because I'm also doing research for my dissertation right now, investigating not the genetic aspect per se, but we are collecting plasma samples from like every participant that I have, but we're looking at what factors related to the dopaminergic system motivate people to exercise. That's kind of my question. Can we manipulate dopamine in a way that we can induce a change in behavior? So I thought that was very interesting because I recently wrote a review, and obviously I focused on the genetic component of all the reward systems and of, like I don't know, dopaminergic receptors and so on. But when I was reading this paper particularly, I saw that none of those genes came out.
Yeah.
So that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that has been kind of a common story in terms of what genome-wide association studies have brought to the table. Because before genome-wide association studies, we had these hypotheses about specific pathways or specific proteins or genes, but we couldn't really test the whole genome. So and when we were able to test the whole genome through genome-wide association studies, we often found that the so-called candidate genes that we thought would be involved didn't turn out to be involved. Although I would say for physical activity, there's a big paper that's going to come out soon, and they did confirm some of those dopamine, like DRD2, as well as ACTN3, which you may have read about, which is supposedly involved in the proportion of fast and slow twitch muscle fibers. So it does look like that those previous candidate genes are holding up somewhat in some of these analyses.
Yeah. So did you find anything, and usually, you know, I don't like to give spoilers of the paper just so that people can go ahead and read it, but did you find results that you found particularly surprising that you were not expecting?
I mean, I think one of the most, I don't know if it's surprising really, but I think one of the most interesting findings has been an association with this gene called CADM2, and which stands for cell adhesion molecule 2. And that gene has been found to be associated with lots of other traits, behavioral traits, including, I think it was first associated with BMI. And very intriguingly, the allele or the variant that was associated with higher BMI was also associated with more physical activity, which is kind of the opposite of what you would expect based on the phenotypic measures. And so that locus is very interesting, and it probably has something to do with personality. So it's also been associated with risk-taking behavior and other personality traits. So little nuggets like that kind of maybe start to give some insight into the mechanisms and the pathways that, I mean, we still don't really know what CADM2 is doing,
right?
But just by looking at the phenotypic associations, we can start to get some idea of what I call the phenotypic landscape, like that it increases BMI, or it's associated with higher BMI. I think also higher alcohol, higher risk taking, higher physical activity, more impulsive behavior, and
yeah.
So I think we're going to find more and more of these kind of unexpected relationships between.
Like, why would you encourage people to look at more behavioral measures?
Yeah, a few reasons. So we know from twin studies that genetics plays a fairly large role. Let's say 50% of the variation in why some people love physical activity and some people hate it. 50% of that variation can be explained by genetic factors, and we've seen that from twin studies. And so now we have the opportunity to identify specific genes. And by identifying specific genes, we can learn more about the underlying mechanisms and tissues that explain why some people are, is it, likely something in the brain, but what part of the brain, what pathway might be involved. And so that just gives us more information about the biological mechanisms, which down the road could lead to better identifying individuals who prefer one type of physical activity over another, or individuals for whom it might be really hard to adhere to a physical activity regimen. And so that's one avenue, learning more about the biology and learning more about individuals and what individuals might like to do more or less. And then the other avenue that this research could lead us down to is understanding the causal relationship between behaviors such as physical activity or alcohol consumption, or any kind of behavior, or what we in epidemiology call exposure, kind of generically. So are these exposures and behaviors causally associated with disease? Or is there some kind of confounding? And usually in traditional epidemiological studies, it's hard to totally rule out confounding, and it's hard to totally rule out reverse causation. That maybe the diabetes is what caused more physical activity instead of the other way around. And even a randomized clinical trial has the limitation of the short time frame. But with genetics, we can get have another angle with which to answer the question of causality. Another example I use a lot in my teaching is the red wine, and in terms of behavior, red wine drinking or wine drinking and heart disease. There have been studies that have found associations, but is that real, or have we just not controlled potential confounders enough? Or could there be reverse causality?
Right.
So yeah, those are the kind of main. So I think in terms of physical activity, using this genetic approach, which is called Mendelian randomization, we can shine more light on whether, for example, physical activity, does it really reduce depression? Does it increase risk for ALS? Does it do anything to your body fat distribution? Does it actually lower your belly fat or whatever, and so we can have a genetic perspective on those very important questions. The tricky part with the genetic analysis is that the individual SNPs, or the individual genetic variants that are associated with traits in general, have very small effects, and so usually you need a very large sample size to be able to detect associations, especially if you're just doing a GWAS or genome-wide association approach. Then you have
I truly believe that behavioral data, like questionnaires, are very important when understanding like actual real life implications.
I totally agree. I mean, that's why 5 years ago, before this liking survey came out, I had this fantasy of being able to ask people, are you physically active? Do you like it, or you just do it because you want to look good, or because it makes you feel good, or do you feel kind of restless sometimes, like kind of antsy? You feel like you got to go and get up and do something, or can you sit for like 3 hours without getting up? Those kinds of questions. So I agree that although the self-report behaviors have limitations, I mean, people sometimes exaggerate or forget, but they can also give very good information as well.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's, for example, if there's a question that says like, how do you like to sweat? I don't know the exact question, but at the end of the day, whatever they feel like, whatever they perceive, it's what they will do. So that's where I see the value. Just to finish up, do you have any main takeaways for perhaps a more scientific, research audience, and then maybe another one for the more general population about why was this particular study important for us?
Okay, so maybe for the scientific community, I would say that this study was important because it furthered our understanding of the genetic basis of physical activity behavior, which is a new kind of area that we're able to explore now with databases like the UK Biobank that are large enough to detect these tiny genetic effects. And by identifying the genetic variants, then we can learn more eventually about the biology and the pathways underlying physical activity behavior. And we can also immediately, maybe, use the Mendelian randomization approach to better understand what the causal relationship between physical activity and all kinds of disease and trait outcomes. And then for the more general community, we are trying to learn more about we know that genetic factors underlie variation between us. You know, we're all different in many different ways, and the reason for that is partly due to genetic factors. And so we're trying to understand what those individual genetic factors are, and hopefully that will give us a better understanding of why some people get disease and why others don't, and a better understanding of why some people love physical activity and why others hate it.
Yeah. And I had one more question. Okay. Is there any future studies related to this particular one that you are thinking about or that you're working on that you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean, in general, there are a few other cohorts out there, such as I'll put a big plug in here for the All of Us research program. It's a kind of the American version of the UK Biobank, where we're gonna get twice as many people as the UK
Oh,
Biobank.
wow.
They're aiming for 1 million people, Americans, and it'll be kind of a similar idea of following these people over time using electronic health records. And so from there, we can identify more genetic variants. And there are a few other cohorts out there that we're going to be using to identify genetic variants. So kind of continuing along this path of confirming and identifying new genetic variants. And then I'm very excited about using Mendelian randomization, which again is this genetic approach to understanding whether physical activity really protects you against things or not, or if it's not really the physical activity, it's something else.
Wow. Amazing. There's just so much to kind of unravel, but I don't want to keep you here longer. Again, thank you so much. I don't know if you have any last comments or something that you would like to share.
I mean, this is probably not going to make it in the interview or the little clips, but I would just acknowledge the collaboration that this was with various researchers around the world, and so I really want to acknowledge their help because they were vital. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I saw here Amsterdam, Europe.
So we had 2 replication cohorts, one from Netherlands and one from England. And then the collaborator that I worked with, the main co-collaborator, Nicola Pirazzu, was responsible for getting the food liking questionnaire into the UK Biobank, which was a big one. So this was like an email sent to all the UK Biobank participants. Kind of like, I don't know if you've done 23andMe, but 23andMe does this too. They try to get more data because they have your DNA. They have got that. They just need more phenotypes. And so they're sending questionnaires out to get more information about whatever.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for your time.